Hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation. We are Group A17, and today we will be discussing 3 important topics in economics. This is our group members. Let's start with our first topic.
Hi everyone, my name is Zhang Shaozhen. Today I will be presenting on the topic 1, Trumponomics, tariff impacts between the United States and Taiwan. Under Trumponomics, the United States adopts a policy of America First, emphasizing trade protectionism and reciprocal tariffs on major trading partners. Assume that the U.S. government imposes reciprocal tariffs on selected Taiwanese products, for example, semiconductors, machinery, or electronic components, and Taiwan considers countermeasures. So what is a tariff? A tariff is a duty imposed by a national government customs territory or supranational union on imports of goods and is paid by the importer. By raising the price of foreign products, tariffs help protect domestic industries, limit competition, or generate revenue for the governments. Because many Taiwanese goods are high-tech and competitive, tariffs can significantly influence trade. Tariffs therefore provide an incentive to develop production and replace imports with domestic products. What is a reciprocal tariff? A reciprocal tariff is a tax or trade restriction that one country places on another in response to similar actions taken by that country.
The purpose is to restore balance in trade and protect local industries. In U.S.-Taiwan trade, a reciprocal tariff means that the United States imposes a tax on Taiwanese imports that matches the tariff Taiwan places on U.S. exports. This is used as a tool to retaliate against what the U.S. sees as unfair trade practice or trade imbalances. For example, in 2025, the United States applied a 20% tariff on many Taiwanese goods as a direct response to Taiwan's tariff on U.S. products. The U.S. argued that Taiwan's average tariff rate, about 6.29%, was higher than the U.S. rate of around 4.24%. Based on this difference, the U.S. applied its reciprocal tariff policy to several Taiwanese export sectors. The sectors most affected include vehicles and auto parts, worth around $880 million in exports, as well as processed foods, seafood, grains, and dairy products. These industries were targeted because Taiwan imposes relatively high tariffs on similar U.S. products. The goal of the U.S. action was to pressure Taiwan into lowering its tariff barriers and creating what the U.S. considers a more balanced trade relationship. Compare of to trade protection. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods that increase their price. Quotas are direct limits on the quantity of goods that can be imported. When we talk about restricting imports, many people assume that raising tariffs is enough. But in practice, governments often choose import quotas instead of higher tariffs, and there are 3 main reasons for this. First, greater predictability in import volume. Because they give more control over import volumes, they set a fixed limit, unlike tariffs, which only raise price. Second, non-tariff barrier preference. Quotas are useful when raising tariffs is politically sensitive or restricted by WTO rules, so governments choose them as a non-tariff alternative. Third, specific industry protection. Quotas help protect vulnerable industries, such as agriculture, where governments want stronger protection for food security and farmers. How do these 2 policies differ in their impact on market efficiency and government revenue? First, both tariffs and quotas reduce market efficiency because they can create deadweight loss. They restrict trade, increase price, and reduce total welfare for consumers and producers. Second, they differ in government revenue. Tariffs generate government revenue because the government collects the tax on each imported good. Quotas do not guarantee revenue. If the government sells import licenses, it may earn money. But if licenses are given for free, then the extra profits, called quota rents, goes to importers or foreign exporters instead of the government. In this diagram, the U.S. demand curve and supply curve determine the import quantity at the world price. Before the tariff, the US buys imports at PW, a lower international price. Once a reciprocal tariff is imposed, the price rises to PT. This higher price reduces US imports because domestic consumption falls while domestic production increases. Therefore, the imports quantity shrinks. In Taiwan's export market, the demand curve represents US demand for Taiwanese goods. Under normal conditions, Taiwan's export price and quantity are determined by the intersection of Taiwan's export supply and US import demand. When the US imposes a reciprocal tariff, American buyers face a higher effective price. Because the tariff makes Taiwanese goods more expensive in the US market, the US import demand curve shifts leftward. This reduced demand reflects the fact that US buyers are now less willing to purchase Taiwanese exports at every price level. After the demand curve shifts left, a new equilibrium is formed. This new intersection occurs at a lower price and a lower quantity compared to the free trade equilibrium. In other words, Taiwan's exporters now receive a lower export price and sell a smaller quantity to the United States. Now let's look at the welfare effects on Taiwan. First, the impact on Taiwanese consumers is relatively small. Since more goods remain in the domestic market when export fall, domestic supply increases. This puts downward pressure on price at home. Taiwanese consumers may benefit from slightly lower prices, but this gain is small compared to the large losses faced by producers. Second, Taiwanese producers are the most affected because the US tariff reduced American demand for Taiwanese goods. Taiwan's export price falls and export quantity decreases. This directly lowers producers' revenue and reduces producers' surplus. The Taiwanese government gains no revenue because the tariff is imposed by the US. Only US importers paid it, so Taiwan's government doesn't collect any revenue from it. Overall, Taiwan's welfare decreased because producers' losses outweigh all other effects. In the US import market diagram, consumer surplus is A plus B, C, D, E, F. Producer surplus is G, and the total surplus is the sum of all these areas. Once the US imposes a reciprocal tariff, the domestic price increases above the world price. Consumer surplus shrinks from A plus B, C, D, E, F down to only A plus B. Producer surplus increases from G to C plus G. The government collects tariff revenue, represented by area E. Total surplus becomes A plus C, A plus B plus C plus E, and G. Compared with the free trade outcome, the economy loses areas D and F. These two areas represent deadweight loss. US consumers pay higher prices, so they lose. Producers gain protection from foreign competition. The government collects tariff revenue. Overall, the economy usually faces a net welfare loss because of the deadweight loss.
Thanks to Shaozhen's introduction on the US government's tariff. Greeting, I am Xiaoying, and I am going to talk about topic 2, which is about TSMC's market condition for semiconductor chips. According to background information provided, this company produced over 90% of the world's most advanced chips, which turns the market into a dominating monopoly influence. And the speech will be separated into 5 parts. The first section explains how TSMC maintains its price and quality skills in monopoly market. The third section talks about TSMC's internal cost structure, and the third section talks about how does it maintain the long-term profits. Fourth section explains its long-term factory expansion strategies, and the final section discusses if the market becomes oligopoly. So let's begin. Let's first begin with investigating the secret behind TSMC's financial income. Here is the company's monopoly market diagram for advanced chips, which, according to the profit maximizing rule, the maximum profit fits on where marginal revenue intersects or equal with marginal cost. as there is no more space for the company's potential gain or loss. To apply this law into the diagram, TSMC's profit maximizing point is where the intersection between MR and MC, which is the green dot here. Therefore, the maximum quantity is Q1, but the price is not only decided by marginal revenue in monopoly, but also depends on the consumer's willingness to pay. So, the price will shift from the same quantity from marginal revenue to the demand curve, which the maximizing profit price is P1 here. TSMC also gains its whole profit from the price gap between total revenue and total cost. Total revenue is where price times quantity. And average total cost, which is the total cost, equals to average total cost times quantity 2. And their profit equals to the space where the blue triangle minuses the green rectangle, the exact same point here. But this profit cannot be considered fully maximized if compared with the perfect competitive market. Here's the comparison between these two diagrams. So, in a perfect competitive market, the profit maximizing point is where price equals to marginal revenue equals to marginal cost, which is a red dot in this diagram, since in the competitive market, the marginal cost is also the supply curve, which is intersecting with the demand curve in the market, is here. The quantity compared with the original monopoly one will be moving from the price will be moving from P1 to P2, while the quantity move from Q1 to Q2. And in comparison, it is very clear that the monopoly diagram lacks a triangular profit space, which is the yellow part between P1 and P2, which is eventually its dead weight lost. Also, apart from price change, the exterior factor can also affect TSMC's profit. For example, when NVIDIA decided to produce more CPU and demand for chips increases, this change caused the demand curve shift from this one, the blue one, demand, to D2, the green line here. And the marginal revenue curve also shifts from the orange one to this red one, marginal revenue 2. And both shift creates a new equilibrium profit and intersection of the new marginal revenue 2 and marginal cost curves, resulting in a higher quantity, which is Q3 here. And by paralleling the quantity into the new demand curve 2, a higher monopoly price is shown where in P3. So, since both price and quantity rising, the profit rectangle grows larger since the total cost did not change, as you can see in this diagram, increased from red rectangle to blue rectangle. So, after explaining the maximum profit, let's take a look at the TSMC's internal structure. First, the fixed cost expenditure of its company includes the clean room, infrastructure for a semiconductor factory, or in other simple words, the basic words needs for placing production equipment, which includes the power stations, water treatment, recycling plants, gas firms, and which including to build a factory like this could exceed $20 billion. It also needs specialized equipment to cap like EUV machines, which can cost over $150 million each, and also other expensive equipment like etching and metrology tools. So, these costs are very expensive for a company, but priced regardless of the company's operation condition. Thus, TSMC owns a very large amount of fixed cost. And compared with that huge amount, TSMC also receives a small variable cost, such as the raw materials and consumables for producing the chip, including silicon wafers, chemicals, or gases. It also has to pay the labor and overtime salary that tied with the operators and technicians. But there's also need for some sudden maintenance for machines that scales partly with the intensity of use, depreciation cost. Thus, TSMC has a structure of enormous fixed cost and very small variable cost. This combination also helps to set up a condition for TSMC to become a monopoly in the chip market, since the enormous amount of fixed cost is consistent. As the quantity of production increases, the average fixed cost falls very sharply. This is the economy of scales phenomenon. In the diagram, it eventually pulls the entire ATC curve downward. Compared with the lowering ATC, other new entry company has no economy of scales, so they have a higher ATC as a disadvantage. And worse, because they produce more, ATC falls more. TSMC will be eager to produce more chips and occupy other companies' production quantity. So the cycle in the cycle reinforces the difficulty for those small companies, as they begin with a high fixed cost but with lower production, and forces most rival companies to live and to maintain TSMC's monopoly status. After understanding both the maximum profit and the cost, to calculate the total economic profit for TSMC, we have to understand the concept of economic cost first, which equals to explicit cost plus implicit cost, and are also represented by the average total cost diagram. Therefore, the economic profit is also again equals to the amount between the price and TSMC times quantity. Also, total revenue minus total cost, which is explained before. There are also some secrets about why TSMC able to maintain such a long-term positive profit while still being dominating the market. It is reinforced by a maintenance of the massive economic and social entry barriers, because to launch a new firm requires billions of dollars, which is a high expenditure for most rivalry company. And also, as mentioned before, the AFC for TSMC falls as it produces more quantity. As it produces more, the fixed cost decreases more, resulting in economic of scale. This allows TSMC to produce more chips at far lower ATC than the others. Furthermore, TSMC also has a significant customer lock-in and trust, as most clients like Apple, AMD, also trust their advanced chips in TSMC's design technology customization. Therefore, for those demands company, the risk and cost associated with switching to an alternative production are prohibited. So, other companies are hard to survive to enter the market and broke TSMC monopoly status. That is impossible. And regarding the new news on factory TSMC builds in Arizona, Kumato, Thurston, they are very clearly long-term decisions, because in the short run, the only input that TSMC can change is the current production quantities by scheduling existing factories. But in the long run, a supplier is allowed to flexibly value all their inputs, including enhancing their factories, number of the factories, and location. Also, to decide whether a new factory involves choosing plant size, commit large fixed capital, and years for planning about operation. So these new factories are again long-run decisions. And the fixed cost investments plays a major role in shaping these decisions again. Because on one hand, this fixed investment literally set up a foundation to build up these factories. But on the other hand, as mentioned for the third time, the large fixed costs lead to economics of scales phenomenon, which ATC falls more as TSMC produces more. And these large fixed costs makes TSMC decide to produce more by establishing factories. It resulting in a positive cycle to push it constantly build new factories in long run production. But this prosperity comes with a danger. It will halt if Samsung Foundry or other companies successfully creates a comparable 2 or 3 nm nodes chips with similar yields and reliability. So the advanced trade market will become an oligopoly. Since only a few large firms enters the market, but they all also offer similar products of advanced chips, it leads to a new change in market for profit, maximum price, and quantity. Instead of pure monopoly pricing, both companies, the rivalry company and TSMC, has to choose negotiation with one another, for example, collusion. So under such negotiation, the individual firm will reach maximizing point profit in price, which is much more lower than monopoly condition, since it has now to separate the profit in monopoly into two for each one. But it will also be above the perfect competition levels, since there's not such more rivalry in the market. So the price will be lower than monopoly condition, but higher than perfect competition levels. But for quantity, the condition is vice versa, since quantity shall be larger than monopoly production, but also lesser with the perfect competition market. But since the decrease of price is larger than increase of quantity, it eventually making TSMC's share decreases. And now here's the end of my presentation on TSMC's market conditions. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Chen Boyong, and today I'm going to talk about the topics air pollution and negative externalities, why the market fails and how to fix it. Air pollution is one of the clearest examples of a negative externality. When firms produce goods, they often generate pollution that harms society, but these costs are not included in the market price. In today's presentation, I will cover a real case of pollution, explain why the market fails, use an economic graph to illustrate the problem, and discuss policy tools including Pigovian taxes and international cooperation. Before we focus on air pollution, it's helpful to briefly review what externalities are. Externalities occurs when a person's or a firm's actions have side effects on others, and these effects are not reflected in market price. There are two types of externalities. A positive externality provides benefit to third parties. For example, when someone gets vaccinated, not only do they protect themselves, but they also reduce the chance of spreading disease to others. A negative externality, on the other hand, imposes costs on others. Typical examples include air pollution from factories or noises from traffic. These external costs, such as health problems or environmental damage, are not paid by the producer, and this leads to the market failure. In this presentation, we focus specifically on negative externalities, using air pollution as our main case. To illustrate the concept, I will use the example of PM 2.5 pollution from the Taichung coal-fired power plant. The plant produces electricity, but at the same time it emits fine particles that cause respiratory diseases, increase medical expenses, and reduce visibility. In this case, the producers are the power plant and industrial users of electricity, while the victims include local residents, neighboring counties, and the public healthcare systems. Firms only consider their private marginal costs. They ignore the external cost, which means the true cost to society is higher. As a result, the market produces more than the society efficient quantity. This overproduction is the root of the market failure. In the graph, private cost curve lies below society cost curve because private producers do not pay for the external damage. The market equilibrium is where demand meets private cost curve, leading to Q1. But the socially optimal level is at Q2, where demand meets society cost curve. The difference between these two quantities represents excessive pollution. The area between social cost curve and private cost curve represent direct loss. This represents the loss in social welfare because society pays the pollution cost while firms do not. The market outcome is therefore inefficient and harmful. So the deadweight loss will be D plus F plus H plus G plus I, and the total surplus will be A plus B plus C and minus G. One way for the government to intervene is through command and control regulations. These include emission standards requiring factories to install filtering devices or setting maximum pollution limits. These tools are effective because they directly reduce emissions. However, they can be costly, inflexible, and may not allow firms to choose the least cost method of reducing pollution. A more market-friendly solution is the Pigovian tax. This tax forces producers to pay for the external costs they create. If the tax is set equal to the difference between social cost curve and private cost curve at the socially optimal quantity, the private marginal cost curve shifts upward until it overlaps with the social cost curve. This aligns private incentive with social welfare and reduce output to the optimal level. In this graph, the Pigovian tax shifts the private cost curve upward to become private cost curve plus tax. The new curve coincides with social cost curve, so the market moves from Q1 to Q2. The direct loss disappears because the externality has been fully internalized. The real example of Pigovian tax includes Taiwan's air pollution fee system. The rate of air pollution for gasoline is NT $0.3 per liter, and the air pollution rate for diesel is NT $0.4 per liter. And the picture on the right side was released by the Ministry of Environment. The government will use the profit earned from the air pollution fees to meet the target, and it includes green energy promotion fees, high pollution management, environment greening, and replacement of old vehicles. The next, we will talk about the pollution problem in the world. Pollution doesn't always stay within national borders. Fine particles, sulfur dioxide, and carbon dioxide can travel across countries. When pollution crosses borders, no single government has full control, and this becomes an international externality. It creates a global public goods problem where cooperation is essential. To address these international externalities, countries often rely on cooperative mechanisms. Examples include the Paris Agreement and cross-border carbon markets such as the EU emissions trade systems. This system creates a global framework similar to a Pigovian mechanism, either by pricing carbon or by limiting total emissions through tradable permits. Such cooperation helps align incentives across countries. Conclusion: air pollution is a classic example of a negative externality that leads to market failure. Because private firms ignore external costs, the market produces too much pollution. Government policies, including regulations and Pigovian taxes, can help correct the failure. And for cross-border pollution, international cooperation is necessary. Thank you for your listening.